The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am the host on behalf of Human Development and Leadership Group of ASQ. We represent the Human Development and Leadership Division of the American Society for Quality. This is a global division aiming to enrich the personal and professional lives of our members and non-members across the global community. We continuously look for new speakers within the range of our body of knowledge, which can be found in my ASQ HD&L community site. We host monthly webinars, so if you're interested or if you know of anyone that is interested, we would be happy to review their application and be our next speaker. Before we begin the webinar today, let me go over some webinar rules. If there is any question or comment, please type your question tab in the question tab that you can find on the right side. And I will be answering the questions throughout our webinar time while our speaker is with us. The webinar will be held for 45 minutes and then our speaker and I will have a Q&A session for 15 minutes for you. Those who attend for 40 minutes will receive 0.1 CEU through an email, which you can save and use to claim the credit with ASQ. So today we are delighted on behalf of HD&L, Karen, your webinar chair. I am very delighted to introduce to you our guest speaker for today. And I am going to introduce you to her with her bio before she takes over. So her name is Vani Pasupathy. She is the managing partner at Building Perspective Inc., a boutique management consulting firm in Toronto, Canada, committed to creating an operational excellence. She has wide and deep experience in business transformation, cultivated over the last 18 years as a process and a quality leader. Her experience spans IT, healthcare, utilities, research and development, and manufacturing environments, ranging from fast-paced startups to multinational organizations. Vani has a talent for creating operational rhythm out of the chaos of everybody's firefighting and rapid growth. Vani, I am looking forward to pick up the learning goodies from you today. So the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited to be here today to talk about this very important topic about winning conversations for change. And I know that there is a lot going on in the world today, so I really appreciate you setting aside this time to come here and learn about this and be with me, and I promise to make it engaging and entertaining. So as you heard in the beginning, I have had a lot of experience in business transformation over the last 18 years. I'm a Lean Six Sigma and advanced facilitation expert. And over the years, I have been responsible for a lot of instigation of change. Some of that change has come from the employee level of the organization, and at times it's come when I was in a leadership position. Other times I was an internal consultant, and later in my career as an external consultant. And what I saw over all those different industries, sizes, and different roles that I was in is how important it is to win over people's hearts and minds if you really want to get organizational change to stick. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, and that's what's motivated me to share some of these techniques with you. It comes from a long time observing and refining some techniques that will help you have better, more powerful conversations. So today we're going to be talking first about what are some of the challenges that people typically face when they start to have conversations about change in their organization. Then we're going to talk about some communication fundamentals. So these are key techniques that if you master or you're aware of, you will know when to use certain ways of speaking and when to use certain ways of listening. The third thing we're going to talk about is conversational frameworks. So this is all about putting together those fundamentals in a method so that you can present your ideas very persuasively. And the last part is about mastery. What does it really take to get good at this? So let's get started. We're in very turbulent times, and companies really need to evolve or risk being left behind. And quality professionals are often at the forefront of that change. So you might be thinking any one of these things. You might be thinking to yourself, what do I have to do to let people know the customer issues I'm seeing are serious? You might be thinking our processes need improving and I've got some good ideas. Or maybe you're thinking there are a lot of other priorities. I'm not sure anyone will listen. These are all very common thoughts that we typically have because we realize that while we as professionals who are seeing a lot of things in our day-to-day experience, we have a certain point of view, we may not be so confident that other people who haven't had our day-to-day experiences can understand these things. So the challenge is convincing some of the folks internally that what you have to say is important. Now, they may have some really good reasons for resisting change. They might have had past unsuccessful change efforts. They may have familiar behaviors that they really want to stick to. They may not be ready to change, and they might have some anxiety for themselves as well as to what this change might mean for them or their role. So as a change agent, you need to be able to show them a truth that really influences both their thinking and their feelings. And we need to have some fundamental conversational approaches to be able to do that properly. So let's first get grounded on what those principles are, and then we'll talk about how to put them together to have some of these conversations. It's better to refer to those. They are about the definition, being really clear about the definition that people are talking about, and they're often found in data. Now, it's quite common to collapse these and talk about these together so quickly that we hardly even know we're doing it. And that's just how human beings are. We are meaning-making machines. We very quickly collapse facts with opinion. So I'll give you an example of the danger of doing this. Maybe a customer comes to you and they ask you to meet to discuss a quality on your manufacturing line. And so immediately you start thinking a bunch of things. Oh my goodness, this customer is unhappy. They might leave us. What do I do? Maybe I should escalate. And you start to get nervous and you go into that conversation with a preconceived notion. And it might turn out, and this has actually happened to me, it might turn out that all they wanted to do was roll out a new quality policy, had nothing to do with the complaint. So when we do this sort of jumping to conclusions, we set ourselves up to not be able to listen carefully and to not really understand or prepare ourselves properly. So we should always be able to distinguish these two things when we're in any of these conversations. The next thing I want to talk to you is about how to present your argument. So once you know the opinion, you've separated facts and opinions, you're going to want to present a reason for doing the thing that you're suggesting. And so you might use different types of reasoning in order to do that. So there's two types I want to talk about right now: inductive versus deductive reasoning. So inductive reasoning is when you take specific examples and you extrapolate or you infer a general principle. Okay, so an example of this might be you have some population data over the last couple of years, And based on that, you can predict or forecast what the population is going to be like next year. So that would be inductive reasoning. There's lots of great uses for inductive reasoning. You use it quite often to predict things like we just talked about. We use it, it's used quite a lot in certain professions like the legal profession or the detective work. So it definitely has a place. But one of the challenges with inductive reasoning is there is some inference involved. So there's a chance that you might build an argument that is not true. And given what we talked about in the previous slide about personal biases and building evidence, there's a little bit of a risk when you do inductive reasoning. Now, deductive reasoning, on the other hand, is different. It starts with a general principle that's true, and we get narrower and narrower statements to a specific truth, a specific irrefutable fact. And this is a different way of supporting a reasoning argument. Now, deductive reasoning is very powerful because it allows you to always come to an irrefutable fact. As long as the preceding statements are true, the final conclusion you arrive at is true as well. So I'll give you a simple example to visualize that. You might start with a general statement like, you know, all humans are mortal. And you say, well, Joe is a human, therefore Joe is mortal. Now you can see how irrefutable that is because you've built your argument very concretely. Now, deductive reasoning is great when facts can be known, when you're doing root cause analysis, when some event has happened and people are trying to figure out why. And you'll see later on when we talk about it, it's very helpful during debating. So it's important to have these two things separated. So let me give you an example of how you might be using inductive or deductive reasoning. So suppose you are trying to figure out if you are eligible for the wage subsidy your government is providing for the pandemic. So inductive reasoning would look something like this. You might say, hey, my friend Sue, she's also a business owner. She started her company around the same time. She's also incorporated. She's able to get the wage subsidy. So there's a good chance that I'm eligible for the wage subsidy. So let me go and apply. So that would be inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, would sound something like this. Well, let me go to a source document. Let me go to the website for the government, and I will download a source document. Let me check all the criteria that are required for this wage subsidy, and I will check them off against my business and see which ones I pass. And if I pass all of them, then yes, I am eligible. Now I'll go and apply for this wage subsidy. So you can see that one is a bit of an inference, and the other one, deductive reasoning, allows you to come to a very concrete and solid conclusion. Oops. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is once you've presented some of these arguments to other folks in a reasonable way, there are two types of things that are going to happen in that conversation. And so I want to talk to you about something about our attitude when we're listening. And this is about judgment versus acknowledgement. So judgment is something that, you know, being judgmental, for example, is something about fault finding. It's about when we jump to conclusions when we're listening to what other people are telling us. It's about sometimes overpowering other folks with our opinions. And it's a very closed-minded way of listening. So judgment, the way I mean this word, is that you're expressing an overly critical point of view of anything anyone else says in the conversation. Now, acknowledgement is very different and has quite the opposite effect. Acknowledgement is about acceptance, okay? It's about accepting the current state without judging it. It's about accepting what someone else has said without agreeing or disagreeing. It's about recognition. It's just recognizing that, yep, I got it. This is what you said, and I got that. I received that. I understood that. It's about listening. So often when we listen and we want to be acknowledging, it's helpful to repeat or recreate what the other person said. So they said something to you and you say, hey, this is what I heard you say. And it's a very open-minded sort of approach to listening to people. So when you have an organization that has a lot of judgment in it, It doesn't foster innovation. It doesn't foster collaboration. And it definitely makes these conversations where you want to make change happen very difficult. So it's very important to use acknowledgement to combat that judgment and in place of having judgmental conversations. The next idea I want to talk to you about is about requests, because at the end of making all your arguments about why you should make a particular organizational change, you're going to get to a point where you want to ask people to do something. So I want to talk to you about requests versus other types of ways, distinctions of speaking. So, you know, it's a good anecdote is something my son, my 12-year-old, just said the other day to me. He said to me, I said to him, can you please put away your dishes? And this was after dinner. Can you please put away your dishes? And he said to me, you know, Mom, I've really grown up, because I used to think that when you asked that, you were asking a question. But now I know that you just want me to do it, right? So that really hit the nail on the head. Sometimes we are asking things, and just because there's a question mark at the end of it doesn't mean it's an actual request. So how do I define a request for the purposes of having these conversations? Well, a request is something where you ask formally or politely for the other people or person to do something, and they have a free choice. That is the key characteristic of a proper request. They have a free choice. They feel they have a free choice to say yes or no. We want to give them that, because that is respectful, right? So there are different things that sound like requests that sometimes people think they're making a request, but they really aren't. And they don't get the same response from people. They don't get the same commitment from people when they use these other methods. So let's take a scenario. Imagine that you want your boss to read a report that you have written, and you want them to read it by the end of the day. So one type of way of asking, which is not a request, is what I call a loaded question. So this is like phrasing it this way. Don't you think it's about time you read my report? And I think most of you wouldn't do this kind of questioning, but we quite often do it without realizing it. You know, it's a built-in judgmental way of asking. You're asking with a lot of expectation, and you're making it hard for them to say no. You know, you make that sort of the wrong answer. You make it obvious in your tone or in the way that you phrase the question that there's one right answer you're expecting. Another thing you might be doing is a command. So read my report today. That's a way of telling people what to do. And sometimes it is appropriate to do that if the you know, if it's your position to do that. But we're talking about asking people to do something that presumably they have a choice in. So this would not be a good approach. This cuts off, you know, their feeling that they can or cannot do something, right? The third way is a suggestion. This one gets confused with the request quite a bit. People think they've made a request when what they've made is really a suggestion. So suggestion sounds like, I'm not saying you have to, but it would be good if you read my report. So you're making sort of an indirect hint, and the other person may not realize that you've really made a request or that you're very serious about it. And they won't have a sense of having said yes or no. It just kind of goes into their head, and they might do it, they might not do it. So that's a suggestion. So a proper request in this case would sound something like this. Would you read my report today? Would you read my report today? That's very neutral, and yes is okay and no is okay. Now, all of these things come up quite a bit when we're having these conversations to try to win change. Another concept I want to share with you is consensus versus agreement. So sometimes when you're trying to convince people, it's not just one person you're trying to convince, you're trying to convince a group. So consensus is when everyone in the group shares the same opinion and they all agree with your way to go forward. But an agreement is different. An agreement is a negotiated arrangement between parties as to a course of action. So quite often all you need is agreement. You don't need a consensus. So we often find ourselves fighting with just one person who doesn't agree with the group, whereas we should try to seek a general agreement that, yes, we're going to take this action forward, even though there may be some members in the group who think it's not a great idea. So quite often we're in that situation of people trying to convince us, and maybe we're the only one who disagrees. And so when we're in that position, we should state our disagreement, but it's helpful to disagree and commit, as I call it. Sometimes you disagree, but the group decides to go a certain way, and if that happens, then go forward with it. I mean, you will either find out that maybe you were right, and people will say, oh, you know, we should have listened. Or you may find out that you learned something new. There was something you thought wouldn't work and it did work. And so by having that attitude ourselves, we can also expect that attitude from other people, that even if we didn't get full 100% consensus, we have enough agreement to go forward, and those folks will also participate in a committed way in the new change. Now, finally, bringing all these techniques together in a conversation requires you to keep a certain level of personal power. And by personal power, I don't mean authority. So authority is something that's given, it's a title, it's a hierarchy. But power is something that no one can take away from you and no one can give you. It's your personal ease and confidence with the material, and it's your willingness to say what's right, even if you might not look right doing it. Okay, that's where that power comes from. We've all had the experience of thinking of the right thing to say after the fact and not being able to pull it up right in the moment. So some of the reasons that happens is people are afraid of asking questions and being seen as incompetent. We're concerned about slowing down the conversation to clarify. We're concerned about offending the speaker with our questions. We might be losing our temper if we feel our point isn't being heard. Or we may have a desire to agree with someone in authority. All of these things can rob us of power in the moment. So what's the antidote to this? So I always say that intention and preparation are the two key things you can do. So intention is about going into certain conversations, fully understanding the dynamics and having an intention for how you're going to behave. If your commitment is to say the difficult thing, then by all means, state that to yourself powerfully before you walk into that conversation. Just doing that quite often sets the tone of how you're going to go through that conversation. The other piece is preparation. Make sure you know your facts. Make sure you have the data handy. Make sure you have the responses for the arguments that you're anticipating. That preparation can really help. And the third thing in preparation, another aspect of preparation, is that we should prepare over the long run to get these skills. After all, it's a muscle. Speaking up is also a muscle. So what I like to tell the folks that I'm coaching is try this on in less less scary situations. Try on speaking up in your relationships at home, in your family relationships. Try to speak your mind in those situations which are a little less contentious, and build that muscle over time to be able to speak up about larger issues that might come your way. Great, so now that we've talked a little bit about all these different aspects of conversations, let's put it together and see how we might use it to create some influential conversations. So we're going to talk about how to create agreements. So I'm actually going to define a kind of structure of how you might put together a conversation. And this conversational technique works for a lot of different things. And at first, you might find yourself prescriptively following this methodology, but after a time, it's going to become very natural, and you're going to make it a part of your DNA. So you'll just speak like this naturally, and it won't feel so contrived. But right now, we're going to break it down so we can understand how you might put a conversation like this together. So the first thing is describe your current state. So tell people in that conversation what's going on today, and use as many facts as you can find to support what you're saying. The next thing you're going to do is talk about the impact of that status quo. So what is going on as a result of what you've just described, and what's going to happen in the future if you don't change anything. So do a little reasonable prediction, like this is where this is going. The third thing is motivate a new future. This is where you want to say something inspiring about what else you could be doing if you do make a change in how you're doing things today. Next, you want to request with a free choice. And we talked about that. Once you've made your argument, you want to ask people how they want to move forward and get their agreement to go forward. And finally, you want to error-proof the agreement. So what do I mean by error-proof? We want to put it in, a calendar, put it somewhere where the rubber meets the road, capture the decision, summarize it in an email. We want to make sure that everyone remembers this is what we agreed to do and why we agreed to do it. So let's take an example to make that more concrete for you. So imagine that you're attempting to convince your team of the value of doing a process improvement project to improve on-time delivery of your product. How might you present your case and get agreement? So first, you might say something about the current state. Today, our on-time delivery of our products is at 70%. This is low by industry standards, and our customers are regularly calling us to trace shipments. The impact. Customers are already starting to look for other suppliers with better metrics, and we're going to lose them. Motivate the new future. Instead, we could take this opportunity to show them we are fully listening to their feedback and win their loyalty. Request with free choice. Can we do a project to investigate and improve on-time delivery for key customers this quarter? So using a structured format like this will give you some way of building your conversation. Now, you might be doing this as a conversation. You might find that you're putting together a much more complicated PowerPoint deck or some other way or presentation if there's a lot of material. But you can kind of follow this format, whether you're doing a formal presentation or having a quick conversation. And that will give you a more persuasive argument to bring other people along. So now I'm going to give you one to think a little bit about, and I'm going to give you a minute to try this one on and see if you got the concept. So imagine that you're attempting to convince your boss to consider pursuing Lean Six Sigma training for your staff. How would you construct this conversation? And to give you a hint, I'm going to put down the different phases that we talked about and give you 30 seconds to think about this. Okay, so we've had a little bit of time to think about this. So I'm going to give you what I would say, and I'm sure you have come up with some equally good ideas as well. But here's an example just so that you can make it more concrete for you. You might say something like this. Our staff are full of fresh ideas and enthusiasm for improving the business. However, they don't have a lot of knowledge about structured tools for data or process analysis. Without this skill set, there's been lots of activity that hasn't produced concrete results. Instead, we have an opportunity to develop our staff and simultaneously get business results if we invest in the right training. I met an ASQ speaker who I thought would be great for our company. Should I schedule a meeting with this expert to explore their training and what it can do for us? So that's just one idea of how you may do it, and you're going to use your own style and your own technique of doing it. But can you see where the transitions are from the different phases we talked about? Current state, impact, motivate the new future, and the request. And once you get agreement, it really helps to go ahead and schedule the meeting or make it concrete so that people will know that it's coming and it's kind of a done agreement. So that's a little bit about how we create conversations to create agreement to move forward. And these are techniques for us to influence change. Now, I know some of you are thinking, listen, I'm trying to influence change all the time. I'm a change agent, and I'm running into a lot of debates and arguments. So let's talk for a minute about winning debates, because that is bound to come up. Sometimes you're going to say things and people are going to disagree with you. So let me give you a couple of tips about how you can win debates. So the first thing is you want to know the irrefutable facts. We talked about this in the beginning. Don't go into debates without having done a little bit of homework. You don't want to be having arguments with people where everybody's just throwing around a lot of opinions. So know the irrefutable facts. Don't be afraid to stop a conversation to say, hey, you know, you just said something, I have a different view of it. Let's go find out what's really going on. This is a very important step. Now, the techniques I'm going to be talking about are all assuming that the facts are on your side. Okay, so assuming the facts are on your side, these techniques will work very well. The second one is keep your power. We talked about that. Don't hold back saying what you think. This doesn't mean being aggressive or insulting. This is about expressing your opinion and feeling okay to have a different one than other people. Having the intention to do the right thing, even if it's difficult, will help you keep your power. Use deductive logic. I can't tell you how many conversations in which the conversation is won simply by saying, hey, what does the source document say about that? Let's start with the facts. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the definition. What do you mean by that word? What do I mean by that word? I've had entire projects go away because we found out that the confusion was the customer had one definition of on-time delivery, we had another, and the sales department had another. You know, it's quite often that people are talking about the same terminology and they mean all different things. So deductive logic requires us to start at the very beginning and understand everything that's coming out of our mouth. So try to use deductive logic. It will take you a lot quicker to the right conclusion. Acknowledge inherent agreements. There's always going to be some stuff that you agree with the other person about. I've seen lots of arguments where people actually agree about 70 or 80% of the content, but they're really just caught up on that last 20 or 30%. And so rather than focusing on that for the entire discussion, make sure you mention the things that you do agree about so that you can all level set that, hey, we're on the same page about all of these things. It's just these small things that we need to get sorted out. And that's always very helpful. Finally, you want to pick your position. So this is a subtle thing, but you may not even be aware of it. There's sort of two ways to go about showing that the facts are on your side, or that, you know, that here's the argument that you're making. You can take an offensive approach or a defensive approach. So an offensive approach is when, you know, maybe you have all the facts in front of you and you very directly say, look, here are all the facts, and you know, I analyzed this and you're wrong, and this is how it is. It's very direct. Okay, direct contradiction of the other person. The defensive approach is you agree with them. You agree that what they're saying is true, even if you know, if the facts tell you otherwise. You assume that it's true what they've said, and you continue the conversation until something they say is obviously wrong. And when that wrong thing happens, or that wrong thing conclusion is drawn, and it's very obviously wrong, you'll be able to say, you know what, our first statement must have been wrong then. Okay, now that sounds a little bit confusing. I know it's a little bit of a tricky concept. Let me try to give you a very simple visual example. Imagine somebody's in a rowboat and they're coming to shore, and there's a hole in their boat. And you yell out to them, hey, there's a hole in your boat. And the person says, no, there isn't. Okay, so now you could take the defensive approach or the offensive. The offensive would be, no, there really is. It's in the right-hand corner, and I see water coming into your boat, and your legs are going to be wet any second now. This is very direct. The defensive approach would be to say, oh, okay, great, so there's no water in your boat. So that means you should arrive on shore with completely dry clothing. So good. And then you let that play out, and what you'll see is, of course, they arrive with wet clothing, and then they say, oh, you know what, I've got wet clothing. Now that's a very simplistic example, but it's one to illustrate the difference between offensive and defensive positioning in a conversation. Now, are you always going to win debates? Of course not, right? But using some of these techniques and principles will allow you to increase your odds. It will allow you to make smarter decisions, and you will gain credibility for being someone who has very powerful arguments over time. And that'll help you influence things as well. People start to get to know you as that kind of person. So let's take an example, okay? So say you're responsible for production on a manufacturing floor, and you've been given a new product by your engineering team. However, you know it cannot be made with the current equipment. The engineering manager is arguing that it has been designed correctly, and the fault is your lack of experience. How could you illustrate your point both offensively and defensively? So as an example, you would first start with the facts. So in this case, you might review the checklist for manufacturing criteria and find that the new design fails on 3 of 11 criteria and indeed cannot be made with the current equipment. So now you have some facts to back up your opinion. Acknowledge. You tell the engineering manager that you both want the same thing, a successful product. Right? This is the inherent agreement and acknowledging that. Now, if you're going to take the offensive approach, you might show the checklist to the engineering manager and point out the failing criteria and ask for a redesign. Very straightforward. If you want to take the defensive approach, you might say, yep, you might be right. You invite them to see the problem and advise you so that you can move forward because you're not able to figure it out. He or she comes down to the shop floor and realizes the equipment limitation on their own and agrees to do a redesign. So that's the defensive way of showing a particular truth and getting people to go in the direction that you want to go in. So it is a bit difficult to show this particular technique in a presentation like this. It is something that in a practical situation, you'll start to see how it works. So that brings me to the final point of the presentation today, mastery. So practice helps you see, and seeing helps you practice. That's a quote from Building Perspectives founder, Desi. You know, so you've learned something new today. I've given you a lot of different concepts. Some of them are very deep. And the only way you're really going to learn this is to practice. I have had a lot of coaches in my career. I'm not afraid to admit it. So having a mentor or a coach really helps with this sort of exercise. Having feedback about how well you're communicating and how well you could be communicating is quite often the key to mastering these techniques. So try them, get some feedback about how you're doing in these conversations, and let me, don't hesitate to drop me a note and let me know if it works. And I'll leave you with this small anecdote. You know, I have a friend who's a dance teacher, and I once asked how she knows if someone is going to be good at dancing when she sees all the little kids come to her class. I said, is it that they have a particular talent that shows up right away? Is it their form? Is it, tell me the secret. How do you know if they're going to be a good dancer? And you know what she told me? She told me that it's the ones that practice at home. Those are the ones I know are going to be good dancers. So that's all it comes to is a bit of practice. And hopefully you have some great success with all of that. And feel free to ask the questions. I'll turn it over to Karen, and she can ask the questions that came up during the talk.
Thank you, Vani. It took me a second to unmute myself. I think there were so many good points that you brought, and I had my own question. I think from the list of questions I have here, I probably will have to ask my own later off the air. So there's a comment from Wayne, and he talked about the definition on opinion. And his comment is an opinion that all agree with is unanimity, not consensus. In your definition, the agreement is consensus. So if you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Right. So consensus is when everybody quite often has a unanimous opinion. That I know there are sometimes different definitions. I guess it depends which dictionary that you get it from. So appreciate you pulling out that the point about the definition. When we talk about consensus, we often talk about everybody having the same opinion. So what I'm trying to point out in that slide is you don't always need everybody's same opinion. Sometimes we have a different opinion and we decide to agree on a course of action anyway. And that's what you want to go for in these conversations more than anything. I hope that helps clarify.
Yeah. Another question we have is, Vani, disagree and commit. Sounds like a
Right.
good concept. What I see
Yeah.
is that often formal decisions are questioned on the informal level and some sort of resistance forms, or maybe you want to call it as disobedience, which leads to daily work priorities over project work. How do you make sure that the informal talk matches the official direction?
Yes. No, this
That's a
is
good one.
fantastic. It's a fantastic question. So, now I'll just draw from some personal experience. Some of that informal talk is happening because no one has had the courage to bring it up formally, right? So this is why we talked about power and authority. When those informal conversations are happening and you're a part of those conversations, I really encourage you to be the one that brings up those conversations and say, you know what, I'd like to be able to commit, but we all informally don't think this is a good idea. And you might use some of the techniques we talked about here today to express why you think maybe a different direction is better, or some facts that support, why people are having some sort of disagreement. So I think the first step is, make it formal. Don't leave it informal. Don't leave it as disobedience. Bring it out. It only takes one person to make powerful change. I really, really believe that. I've often been that one person. So I know it takes courage. It's really hard. But if you're that person, you get to be known to be that person. It'll be good for the whole organization and for you personally and professionally. So I would say bring it out there. Once you've brought it out there and maybe someone above you or someone with authority has made a decision, we have to remember that, that person has that position for a reason. They have the accountability for that decision. And you may not agree, but they do have an accountability. So there's a point at which, you've said everything you're going to say. Now commit, go along with it, because and I've been in that position as well. So I do sympathize. It's hard to do sometimes, but if you commit, sometimes you'll find out you were right and sometimes you'll find out you were wrong. And it's important to be able to have that humility too and say, you know what, this time I was wrong. I learned something today. So it's an opportunity.
I think with some of the different approaches and the structure that you have shared with us today, it really allows you to not take a sudden approach of jumping in the situation, but think it through, do your homework, structure it well, watch your tone, watch your body language, watch how you're putting your question, and then be that one individual that's going to bring the question in front of everyone. So thank you,
Yeah,
Vani.
I think that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's great.
A question that came from Judy, she just wanted to have some clarification on the first example that you shared with us about the wording on the motivation. She's actually looking for the third point motivation that you shared with us.
Third point motivation. So I don't know which example that is, if I can take you guys back a little. Was it this first one here?
I think that's the first one you shared.
Oh, okay. She was looking for the last one here, the third one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly which example. Is there enough information there?
Judy, if you can unmute yourself, let me see if I can unmute yourself and you want to ask, or you want to throw in the question again for me to see if you were asking for something specific in this question, while I'll move on to the next question. Ricardo was talking about current state and sharing that we have so much sources of variation to fix. And after agreement, and his question is, after agreement, can this be posted as for the team to keep in mind commitments?
I'm not sure I completely follow the question. It sounds like they've shared.
I think from what I understood is like, you have given a very structured format of agreeing or disagreeing and how to convey that message to the other party. And I guess once finally you get through that, motion of disagreement and agree on something,
Yeah.
would you recommend posting it for the other team members to keep in mind commitments? Because
Yeah,
obviously you're going to come up
absolutely.
with a list of commitments through it.
Yeah, that's a great way. We talked about error proofing the agreement. So sometimes, I have done things where we all agreed on meeting culture, for example. That's a very popular one. Sometimes when you start a transformation, one of the things everyone's griping about is effective meetings, when to start them, leaving 5 minutes at the end so people can run to the next meeting. Once you get agreement about some of these things, we used to post them up, make them like rules on the wall and do things visually. So sometimes it really helps to do that, depending on what kind of thing it is. If it's rules for the organization, by all means, make it visual. That's a very powerful way.
Okay. I think Judy, I see her question again. Judy, this presentation, I think she's just looking for some exact wordings that you probably have utilized. This recording and presentation will be posted on my ASQ, so you will have an access to it later to pick on any words that resonated with you. Question from Wayne. The team handbook. He said it gives a very good working definition of consensus and describes the process to achieve it.
Right. And what's the question?
No, I think he is just sharing his thoughts with us on this one right now.
Okay, got it.
A question from Celine. When you would have had a large ask, so I think a large quality project, do you recommend making the ask in one's agreement cycle or break it down into multiple discussion cycles?
Yeah, I guess it depends how big that is. It's a bit of a judgment call for the person doing it. I generally don't find, if I've set it up well, that it takes more than a conversation, but it could be different depending on where you are, personally in your own conversational style and techniques and where you are in the organization. But one tip I can give you is that sometimes it helps to pre-talk to people about the idea. So it's not that they come to the session and it's the first time they're hearing it. It does help sometimes to vet an idea ahead of time. And get some thoughts so that you know what you're going into, and then you can probably do it in one conversation.
Yeah, can it make sense? Oh, hey, there's an interesting question from Ricardo. How would you deal and start a conversation about it in a time for a person that is about to retire?
Like they're about to retire and you want them to change? Is that the idea? Like they're sort of at the.
I think
Oh, okay.
we come across situations where we might have people that are, a few years left, lost enthusiasm and not really interested in changing. And how would you go around that situation?
Yeah, it's difficult, but their psychology and their reasons for not wanting change is not so different from other folks who are just sort of in their familiar behaviors. So you have to find out what their currency is so that they feel motivated about that new future. And if they're close to retirement, they may be wanting to leave a bit of a legacy or leave an impression or lead other people or go out kind of as an advisor. So you might engage them by seeing how can they participate, how can they leave their stamp on the organization by showing that they're still growing and they still have things to teach, and can they participate in a more leadership role. That might be one approach you use. It kind of depends on the person. It's helpful to know what really motivates them and to tap into that.
Awesome. A question I have from Inderpal. I think the biggest challenge is coming up with the irrefutable facts. And I know he's saying that maybe this is a comment more than a question, but I think it's a very relevant one, Vani, if you want to kind of expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sometimes it is hard to do that. But my experience has been that 80–90% of the time, we don't stop to try to find the facts. We're in a conversation and we don't want to slow it down and say, well, what actually happened? Everyone will be discussing some email that was sent and something, blah, 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 blah. I can't tell you the number of times that we're very quickly on to what should we do about this issue, long before anyone understands what happened, why it happened, what was actually said, what was actually done. We go through that so quickly. So yes, there might be some cases where it is hard to get those facts, but I'm going to bet 90% of the time it's available. It's just people are rushing by that because they don't want to stop for a whole bunch of reasons. But just slowing down a little to figure that out, or someone saying, you know what, we should just go find out what this is what really happened here. You will get a far different and better conclusion than if you gloss over that. So I'm going to challenge that and say, yes, sometimes the facts are not available, but 90% of the time it's that people haven't looked for them. They just haven't looked yet.
Yeah, I think my personal experience given from automotive manufacturing life so far has been that at time it is about changing first us. This is again a very behavioral change about all the things, awesome stuff that you have shared with us. It really is asking us to follow these structures, which is again a change. Not to, like you just mentioned, don't go just rush into it. Ponder over it, think over it, pick what is the right way to approach and negotiate in your conversations effectively. And it's sort of a change for ourselves first, to learn the ability of slowing us down and following that rhythm of structure. And I guess you do it a little bit few times and then you get the hang of it in a practice before we kind of want other people to fall into that pattern that we are suggesting to them.
Yes, absolutely. It is a matter of practice, like a lot of things. And the hardest part I find is just being aware enough in the conversation to know what just happened there. A lot of times it's going so fast, at the end of it, you go, what just happened in that conversation? And you're not even aware of all these things that happen. So that's why today I wanted to make certain things distinct, so that when you see them happening now, you'll be able to recognize them. Oh, I get it. We're all in the opinions and no one knows the facts. Or, hey, we're, somebody with authority is in the room, so everybody's lost their power and no one is bringing out their disagreement. Being able to see these things in the moment is really, really important. So the step before you even get good at the conversation is being good at recognizing it when it's happening in conversations around you. So that's kind of a precursor step that you can practice before you try it on.
Sort of be the role model. First of all, I just want to kind of stop for a second and thank everyone who's sending me messages about the value they're getting and the points and the good discussion we are having. So probably instead of replying one by one, I just thought it would be better for me to say it collectively on air. A question from Fernando. With a company with many issues, late delivery, repetitive NCRs, lack of inventory integrity, where do you start? A great question. I was going to jump into saying something, but I would let Vani take the lead. Vani, where do you start when you have so much around you that require changes?
Yeah, then the conversation you need to have is more about the fact that there are so many things. Like, rather than trying to attack one particular thing, you say, hey, there are just so many places where we need to improve quality, cost, delivery, right? And the thing you want to win is a conversation about, can we have a program to address these things? Can we bring in some help? Can we do, I don't know, a formal lean program? So you want to try to win agreement that there is, first of all, sort of a global problem, and that it isn't going to get solved by you solving one little thing at a time. So go for that. You have to go for that bigger conversation and say, can we get agreement that we need to do something structured because this ad hoc way we're trying to improve these things is not working, right? Do we all agree it's falling apart, right? So you have to go for that conversation first. That's where I would go.
Yeah, and then sometime one of the approach that I've used in my life so far is, if you have too many to handle and it's kind of creating that pressure around you, pick the lowest hanging fruit. Go with the easiest of all that can allow you to kind of stand out and gather some people that would start listening and following you before you want to handle a complex situation.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
A question from Inderpal. I think the biggest challenge is coming up. Oh, I think we already answered that. My apologies. Message from Teresa for she's again appreciating and thanking for all the great information that we're sharing. One of the questions I personally had, Vani, was on preparation. I think you gave
Yeah.
an awesome example to us with your son, just picking up the plates after the dinner. And that kind of just reminded me about the tone. At times our mind is thinking something different, but our tone or body language says something different, and it delivers a different message to people. And then I
Yes.
like the fact that where you were talking about, preparing, you do your homework, prepare well, have the right data. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that and the effectiveness of that?
Yeah. So for a long time, me personally, I had this notion that I would prepare and be intentional about a conversation, but sometimes you're so caught up in your scheduling and your day-to-day activities, you don't stop and think about what you want out of this. So it's very helpful as part of preparation to, we talked about knowing your facts and having the data handy and thinking about what other people might say and what you might say in return. Like these are all ways of preparing. And what I like to do is have what I call an intention for that conversation. So even, an intention to always win the argument isn't always possible, but you might say, you know what, I intend to be really powerful in that conversation. I intend to speak my mind even when it's difficult. I intend to have courage today. I intend to voice the concerns that my peers have expressed but are too scared to say. Today I'm intending all these things. If you kind of declare that in your mind before you go in, you'll go into it with quite a different level of power, right? So preparation helps with that. I think it helps to prepare content and prepare yourself, like if it's going to be a difficult conversation.
Thank you, Vani. Thank you for, I think, a lovely conversation and great structural points that you have shared with us. For sure, along with many others, I would say in the webinar, I would be revisiting the presentation and capture all the goodies out of there. And for everybody that attended the webinar, thank you so much. And thank you for all the questions that you have raised. Today's presentation and recording will be posted on our MyASQ community as well as YouTube channels sometime this week. Our next webinar, I hope to see you there as well, will be on December 9th, and the topic will be Voice of the Customer by Tony Belowski. Registration can be done on myasq/home community. And to get automatic notification on future webinars, you can follow us on LinkedIn page or sign up for our newsletter through our website. We would also highly appreciate that you fill in a 1-minute survey, which will pop up on your screen as soon as you close the webinar. For those who are attending over a phone call only, you will receive a follow-up email within an hour. For your CEU credits, for those who have attended at least 40 minutes, you will receive a separate email and in addition to the follow-up email within this week, which you can use to claim your credits. Thank you to everybody for making the time and joining us today. Thank you, Vani, for sharing the wealth of knowledge you did with us today. We look forward to have you again at some point, and we look forward to see everybody in the next webinar on December the 9th. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.